Ladies, what is the most obvious hint you've dropped that went unnoticed by a guy? Welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Story 1. I actually had sex with a girl before realizing she was genuinely into me. One night, she knocks on my dorm room door wearing a mini skirt and holding an entire chocolate cake she'd just baked. She says, "I thought you might like to try some." I'm not a big fan of chocolate, which seemed to crush her a bit, but I add, I'd still love to try it though. So I invite her in and we set the cake aside. She asks what I'm up to. I tell her honestly that I was just about to start watching V for Vendetta, and she lights up, saying it's one of her favorite movies and asking if she can join me. We lie down together on my unfolded futon under a blanket. It was the middle of a freezing Boston winter, and start watching. As the movie plays, she keeps making comments about Hugo Weaving. I love Hugo Weaving so much. God, he's so hot. Man, Hugo Weaving makes me so turned on. Meanwhile, I'm just nodding along like, yeah, he's a fantastic actor. Loved him in The Matrix. About 20 minutes in, I notice her subtly rubbing up against me and realize she's, well, touching her kitty. She says, "Sorry, hope you don't mind. I just got really turned on and couldn't help myself." I'm sitting there, amazed, thinking, wow, this movie is really doing it for her, and say something clueless like, "Oh, yeah, I get it. There are actresses that do that for me too." Still not getting that she's making a move. Another 10 minutes go by before she finally just turns to me and asks, "Can I go down on you?" And my brain, my totally oblivious brain, immediately thinks, wow, Hugo Weaving is the ultimate wingman, and wow, talk about good timing. It wasn't until a year later that it dawned on me. The whole setup was just her way of getting close to me. It didn't even matter what movie was on. Story 2. Back when my boyfriend and I were just friends, I spent a night at his apartment after we'd hung out all day. I was supposed to sleep on the couch, but I managed to find an excuse to end up in his room. I think I told him his roommates or neighbors were too loud, and he kindly got up to grab a pillow and blanket for me to sleep on the floor. By then, I'd taken off my bra and borrowed his sweater. I even teased him about hogging all the blankets up on the bed, and eventually, he invited me to join him. Then I told him I couldn't sleep and suggested we stay up to watch a movie together. Netflix and chill classic. I'd read on Reddit that Jurassic Park was a great date movie, so I suggested we watch it on his phone, without mentioning the date part. By then, I was beyond nervous, so there we were, lying in his bed, watching Jurassic Park on his phone. I leaned on his shoulder and started inching closer. We stayed like that all night, curled up and barely touching, neither of us daring to break the spell. We fell asleep just like that. He didn't ask me out until about 5 months later. We ended up recreating that moment on a hotel bed, after sneaking a bottle of wine up from his office Christmas party. This time, I decided to be brave. After a few sips of wine, I looked into his eyes and kissed him. Later that night, we admitted that we'd both held back during that first night because we didn't want to risk our friendship on a one-night fling. The only potential obstacle was the 2-hour distance between us. Less than a week later, I took the bus down to stay another night, told him I loved him, and suggested we give a relationship a try. We've been together ever since, and we're moving in together in just a few weeks. Story 3. When I was a freshman in high school, I started talking to this girl who would skip class to come hang out with me in study hall. She'd doodle all over my notebooks, and before long, she started bringing me little gifts. I always had a pack of sour icebreakers with me, and one day she brought me a pack. Another time, I mentioned how much I loved Reuben sandwiches, and a few days later, she showed up with one wrapped in tin foil. My favorite band was Black Sabbath, and she brought me a box set of all their albums, which she had checked out from the library in the next town over. I spent that night burning copies of all the CDs, and when my mom asked where they came from, I told her, "Oh, this girl from school got them for me." She looked at me and said, "The same girl who's been writing on all your stuff?" I nodded. Then she said, "Honey, you know that means she likes you, right?" That was 12 years ago, and we've been married for 4 years now. Story 4. At a party, this girl kept calling me a cutie and asking why I didn't have a girlfriend. She was pretty drunk and ended up falling asleep on my lap for a while. I started to get the sense that her hands were slowly moving in an intimate direction, but since I was also drunk, I thought it was just a side effect of the alcohol. So, I gently moved her hands away. Later, we all decided to crash at a friend's house, since no one could drive. Once everyone was asleep, she suddenly poked me and asked if I could help her to the bathroom. I helped her out, set her down, and closed the door behind her. Before she went in, she asked me to sleep next to her. I thought she was just being nice, so I politely declined. The next morning, everyone laughed and called me a saint for turning down her offer. Story 5. I was talking to him, trying to get advice, and asked, "So, you're saying if I like this guy, I should just be straightforward and ask him out?" He replied, "Yeah, exactly." Without missing a beat, I said, "Okay, do you want to go out with me this Friday?" He responded, "Yeah, just like that, it was perfect." Cue my stunned silence. Looking back, I'd been testing the waters because I had no idea if he was into me, and if he'd said no, I could have brushed it off as a joke. Teenager logic, right? After a pause, I repeated my question with extra emphasis on you, and he laughed and said yes. Edit. This was about 10 years ago, so this is how I remember it. Story 6. Buckle up, this is going to be a long one. I had this guy friend that I accidentally fell for a while back. After about a year of knowing each other, we hit that awkward stage in a friendship where there's a lot of flirtatious banter, but neither of us has the courage to make the first move. Things escalated over the next few months. We started calling each other sweetheart and darling. Ironically, playful groping became a regular thing, and there was a lot of casual touching. By this point, everyone at the bar we frequented thought we were already a couple, but no, neither of us made a move. At this stage, it had become routine for me to come up with some flimsy excuse, like not wanting to walk home, and he'd invite me to crash at his place if we ran into each other at the bar. I figured he'd catch on eventually, but nope, no attempts to take things to the next level. I'd even change into one of his t-shirts and boxers while he was in the same room, we'd cuddle up to sleep, and the next morning we'd just lay there, chatting about random stuff. My most obvious attempts to get him to act, like straddling his lap and flirting, were either ignored or met with mild amusement. The worst moment? He actually started talking about a friend's ex-girlfriend that he found attractive, but couldn't pursue due to bro code while we were spooning in bed. At that point, I realized I'd somehow bypassed the friend zone and gone straight into the human cuddle blanket zone. I told myself to bury those feelings and move on. He clearly wasn't attracted to me at all. A whole year passed with no more flirting, cuddling, or sleepovers. I figured my assumptions were confirmed. He wasn't interested. And then, as if on cue, we're at the same bar again one night. Drinks were had, random things were said, and somehow, the conversation turned to things we probably shouldn't have been discussing while intoxicated. And that's when he dropped the bomb. "Yeah, I used to be really attracted to you, but I didn't think you were interested." This, from the guy who had me sitting on his lap in his bed, wearing his clothes with my bra abandoned on the floor. And that, fellow Redditors, is how I learned never to underestimate the power of male obliviousness. At least it makes for a mildly entertaining story. Story 7. I'm a guy, and I've shared this story before, but it really illustrates just how oblivious we can be. I met this girl through my female best friend. We quickly bonded over our shared love of movies and soon got into a routine. She'd come over most evenings, we'd hang out, smoke a joint, and dive into some foreign films, work through the Criterion Collection, or watch obscure cult classic. She'd often stay well into the night and even sleep over, usually in my room, with me. This went on for quite a while until, one day, she just vanished. She deleted her social media and cut contact, completely disappeared. I didn't think I had done anything wrong, so I just assumed it was a life change and moved on. Years later, during a call with my best friend, I made a joke about Netflix and chill. She paused and then said, "That's what I spent months trying to do with you." It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no clue the entire time. The worst part? I was totally head over heels for her. Story 8. My current boyfriend and I started out in this weird friends that flirt stage. I was trying to find a way to get him to make a move. One very hot evening, middle of August, we were sitting in his backyard with a few of our friends drinking beer. I sat on the same lawn chair as him, kind of wiggled in, and said, "I'm cold." He left me alone in the chair and proceeded to build a giant fire. It took like an hour. When he was finished making the fire, he sat back down in a different lawn chair. Story 9. I told my boyfriend to get naked and he responded, "You get naked." So I said, "Okay, I will if you're nice to me." He laughed and went to sleep. Guess he didn't want to be nice. Edit. He didn't think I was being serious until he woke up to me petting my kitty. Story 10. I always assumed I was too unattractive and didn't want to become the creep who couldn't keep his hands to himself. So I didn't pick up on hints. It wasn't that I didn't notice them, but I was so terrified of misreading the signals and ending up in trouble that I just avoided acting on anything. So, at about 19 or 20, my next-door neighbor started showing interest in me. One day, she invited me over for dinner. I, being completely oblivious, ate the meal and made sure to compliment her cooking. Then she suggested we take a nap. My mind went straight to, oh, I get to lie next to her. Maybe I can accidentally brush up against her. But then, she decided to take a shower. Afterward, she walked around the apartment naked in front of me. I was still thinking about that accidental touch, but in the back of my mind I was also worried about misinterpreting things and getting into a bad situation. Finally, she climbed into bed next to me, and I completely froze. The thought of being in an uncomfortable situation where I couldn't tell if she was just teasing or actually interested made me feel stuck. I convinced myself that if she wanted anything to happen, she'd have to make the first move. So, eventually I just made up an excuse and left. Looking back, I realize how much of an idiot I was. Story 11. After a conversation with my boyfriend about not being obvious enough when trying to initiate sex, I decided to get a little creative. I posed naked on the corner of the bed and whispered, "Hey, you," as he walked in. His reaction? He walked in, gave me a casual bro nod and said, "Hey babe, I gotta poop." Needless to say, we did not have sex that night. Story 12. I'd known this girl for about a year and had low-key feelings for her the whole time. We got close over a few weeks, and one night I was watching some movies at her place. It got late, so I started heading out, but she stopped me, saying, "I don't want you to go." Thinking she just didn't want to be alone, I followed her upstairs, and we got into bed, where absolutely nothing happened. The lights went out, and we started to fall asleep, but I was lying there thinking, man, I wish I had the guts to make a move, but I didn't. Then she sits up, takes off her top in a way I couldn't possibly miss, and lies back down. And still, I didn't realize she was the one making the move on me. 10 minutes later, she finally gives up, turns, and kisses me. She teased me about this for months afterward. Story 13. I'd pretty much moved in with him because my roommate, who happened to be his ex, had more or less taken over my apartment. I'd come home from work to find random Tinder guys she was hooking up with hanging out there. Long story. So I ended up staying at his place all the time. First, I was crashing on his couch, then on a spare mattress in his room, then in his bed. Eventually, we'd moved to cuddling, and I even started sleeping there completely naked and subtly rubbing up against him night after night before anything happened. We're married now, so it all worked out in the end, but wow, it took a while. Story 14. When I was 19, I met this girl who invited me over to hang out. It was around 2 a.m., and we spent an hour or so just hanging out near her place. Then, at 3 a.m., she goes, "Why don't we go upstairs and have some coffee?" Completely clueless, I replied, "Nah, I'm good. I'm pretty tired. This was fun though, let's do it again sometime," and I left. She never responded to me after that. Fast forward to me at 31, sitting in a diner with some friends, laughing about missed signals. Mid-laugh, it hit me like a ton of bricks. She wanted sex. How did I not realize? Apparently, this is a classic scenario that's shown up in Seinfeld or something. But yeah, this was my story, and I bet it's a pretty relatable one. Story 15. When I was hitting on my now boyfriend of 3 years, I complimented him on how handsome he was and how beautiful his eyes were. Wanting a closer look, he texted me a creepy close-up shot of his eyeball with his eye wide open. He honestly thought that's what I wanted. After our first date, I couldn't stop talking about future dates and how much fun I had with him. I stayed out so late that I missed my friend's party. But because I didn't give him a proper hug and suggested we split the bill, he thought I wasn't actually interested. Story 16. He said, "I don't want to pressure you, but it's pretty late, and I think you should spend the night. My couch is super comfortable, and I can make it up for you if you'd like." I replied, "Maybe I could sleep in your bed with you." He immediately shot me down, saying, "I promise the couch isn't bad." Brutal. Story 17. After a long time of trying to get this guy into bed, I finally resorted to having a roll on his leg in a moment of desperation. He thought it was hilarious. Years later, he asked me why we never hooked up. Edit. Just to clarify, we were making out on his couch at the time. It wasn't like I just randomly attacked him and tried to pound his leg. Story 18. My not-yet boyfriend and I were at the train station, waiting for my train home. He'd catch a bus after mine arrived. When my train finally pulled up, I thought, screw it, and went in for a kiss on the mouth. Then, I jumped onto the train just as the doors closed. I couldn't see or feel his reaction, so I sat on the train feeling pretty anxious, wondering if I just messed everything up. About 5 minutes later, I got a text. "That was just a friend kiss, right? Bless his heart, lol." Story 19. Once, I was texting my boyfriend and told him I'd bought a vibrator for when he was away at work or just out. His exact response was, "Oh cool, what color?" I sent him a pic and he followed up with, "Can you, too?" I texted back, "Come over and find out," and 2 minutes later, he replied, "Never mind, I just Googled it." Story 20. I love sharing this story. Long before my husband and I started dating, we were having a party at my apartment. When it wound down, he mentioned he'd just crash on the couch. I told him, "You can come sleep in my bed." "And I kid you not," he replied, "but where would you sleep? I can't kick you out of your own bed." Story 21. Not a lady, but this is the story my best friend will always kill me for. I went out with a girl I liked to watch a play in a nearby city. She lived there, I didn't. Afterward, I was about to head home, but the train system had shut down because of floods. I didn't have anywhere to stay, but she offered me her friend's room since her friend was overseas at the time. This had happened once before, but I just crashed on the couch because her friend was still around then. We got back to her place pretty late, and she asked if I wanted to drink and stay up. Since it was a shared student accommodation with 2 other people who weren't her friend, she suggested we move to her room because we were being too loud in the common area. Once we were in her room, she started talking about a lot of things, mostly sex-related. She mentioned being on birth control, recently breaking up with her ex, and her dating experiences. The part about birth control should have been my first clue. I sat in the chair while she sat on the bed, and then she told me to come sit on the bed with her. She kept comparing me to her ex, talking about how much smaller, in both height and build, he was compared to me. The biggest clue that I totally missed, and still slap myself for, was when she found out I was a virgin and offered to show me how to take off a bra. Let's just say I ended up in her roommate's room that night. My only defense for my stupidity is that I was a lightweight, and by that point, I had downed about 5 bottles of soju, so my judgment was a little impaired. Story 22. Back in college, my now husband of 4 years would walk me home from class at night. One evening, I finally worked up the nerve to ask him to come upstairs and have some wine with me. He turned me down hard. Okay, not into it. 2 months later, he invites me and my friends to a party. When we arrived, he's blackout drunk and tells my friend that he's in love with me and got wasted because he was nervous about seeing me. She convinces him to tell me, since she knew I was also into him. Here's the twist. He admits he really likes me but didn't want to mess up my relationship. I'm confused. What relationship? He points to Matt, the guy from our class that I always chat and laugh with. Oh, Matt, as in the guy with the boyfriend Matt? Well, that kind of explains everything. Story 23. When my girlfriend and I first started talking, she kept dropping hints like suggesting I could stay the night and share the bed if I wanted a nightcap or was too tired to drive. But since I wake up at 4 a.m. for work, I told her I was pretty tired and thought I should head home since it wasn't too far of a drive. When I got home, I found a link from her waiting for me. It was a video from Casually Explained titled, "Is She Into You?" Story 24. My former best friend and I were incredibly close, so close in fact that I fell in love with her, and it turns out she felt the same way about me. We'd hang out more often in the evenings, sometimes late at night, watching movies and spending time together. She started getting more direct about her feelings, making it clear she was interested. One night, she was getting ready for a party without a bra on, and suddenly started telling me that I didn't need to leave the room while she changed. She also got extra cuddly on the couch while we were watching a movie, and I was thinking, I could make a move, but I'm really happy with the friendship we have. We even went out to a party once, and when a guy started dancing with her, she said something to him, pointed at me, and the guy quickly ran off. I assumed she wasn't into him. The turning point for me came one night when we ordered food and talked about how, if someone insists that you stay over even when you're not far from home, it's usually a hint. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to head home, it was late and I had about a 25-minute walk. She said, "You know, you can sleep here. We're all alone." But I replied, "Nah, I'm good. It's not that far anyway." Those 2 conversations were only about 5 to 10 minutes apart. And as if that wasn't enough, for her 21st birthday, I gave her an iPhone. In front of everyone, she hugged me, looked me deep in the eyes, and said there was only one thing that could make the moment perfect. And I did absolutely nothing. If I had a time machine, I'd kick myself for missing that opportunity. Could have been the best relationship of my life. Lesson learned. If you don't act when the signs are clear, you'll miss your chance. Story 25. I was totally Mr. Oblivious for a while, especially during my first year of college. I was pretty shy and had never really talked to a girl who wasn't one of my sisters, let alone had a girlfriend. The summer before college, I made a vow to try to be more social. Anyway, I noticed this really cute girl in one of my classes but never had the nerve to talk to her. She seemed to be talking to a friend of mine though. One day, she asked me to help her with a programming assignment. This was back when we had a computer center with time-sharing terminals on a prime computer system, so I jumped at the chance to help. After doing this off and on for a couple of months, she suggested we do something together. We ended up going to a concert we both wanted to see. While sitting in the car outside her house just talking, she asked me why it took me so long to ask her out. I told her I was shy, nervous, and wasn't sure if she would want to go out with me. She laughed and said, "Didn't you see the hints?" Apparently, she'd been sitting closer to me, talking to my friend to make me jealous, asking for help with assignments, and I totally missed all of it. I was pretty clueless. We went out for about 6 to 9 months, but things just didn't work out. I can't really pin down what went wrong. We never fought or had any disagreements, we just kind of drifted apart. But during that time, I felt on top of the world. I still think about her sometimes. Story 26. We were married 2 full years before I finally understood that if she took a bath at night I was going to get some. Watched a lot of baseball while she lay sparkling clean in bed alone. Story 27. I was staying the night at a female friend's house, and I had a huge crush on her. It was our first time sleeping in the same bed, and as we were getting settled, she casually said, "Just so you know, jeans aren't allowed in my bed. You have to take them off." I laughed and jokingly replied, "Ha ha ha, that's a dumb rule, I'm keeping them on." Looking back, that moment still stings. To clarify, this girl is still one of my best friends, and I guess that's why I was completely oblivious to the hint. I didn't plan on staying the night, it just kind of happened, so no, I don't typically sleep in jeans. We both laugh at my stupidity now, but honestly, I'm glad I didn't act on it because I wouldn't want to risk losing such a good friend. It's a funny story to tell now, and I'm glad you all enjoyed it. Story 28. I told him, "I think you're really cute and I like you. A lot." His response was a hesitant, thanks." I accepted that my feelings were unrequited and decided I was content with just being friends. 3 months later, after a tough night, he spent hours comforting me before finally confessing that he'd had feelings for me all along, dating back 6 months. When I asked why he hadn't said anything when I first told him my feelings, he said, "I wasn't sure you liked me." That was 4 years ago, and he's still as cute and dense as ever, fast asleep next to me now. Story 29. A friend of mine, now my boyfriend of 7 years, asked what I wanted to do that night and I replied, "You." He didn't even seem to register what I'd said and casually suggested we go see a movie instead. This wasn't even the worst part. My poor, oblivious boyfriend. Eventually, I asked him out after a friend told me he was really into me. I thought his suggestion to watch a movie was his way of gently turning me down. The poor guy still kicks himself for it, even after 7 years. Story 30. During senior prom season, there was this girl I had most of my classes with. We were good friends, had a lot in common, were both at the top of our class, and I thought she was pretty cute. One day, she and her friend came up to me at lunch. "Hey," she said, "don't you want to ask me something?" I raised my eyebrows, totally blank. I don't know what." She and her friend exchanged a look. "Are you going to prom?" she finally asked. I shrugged. "I'm not sure, I don't have anyone to go with." Looking back, I realized she was dropping a major hint, but I didn't pick up on it at all. I ended up going to prom with the guys instead. Foolish, I know, but hey, hindsight's 20/20th. Story 31. Fellow fool here. Back in 1988, before being a nerd had any cool factor, I was just that, a nerd in high school, but somehow I was lab partners with the 2 most popular girls in school, one the cheerleading captain and the other the SGA VP, and they were both stunning. Despite my nerd status, they found me interesting. As prom season rolled around senior year, I had already decided I wasn't going. I didn't have a girlfriend, had only gone on a couple dates, and figured the easiest way to skip all the prom pressure was just to stay home. But then, they cornered me. "Who are you taking to prom?" they asked. "No one." "I'm not going," I replied. "You have to go. Everyone is going." I shrugged. "Nah, it's not my thing. Besides, who would I even go with?" They looked at each other and one of them said, "You should ask Jonelle," referring to another cheer captain who'd recently broken up with her boyfriend. "What? She'd never go with me?" "Oh, I bet she would if you asked her." But I couldn't believe it. I insisted, "No way," and they pressed me to ask, but I didn't. What I didn't understand then was that girls operate on a whole different level than guys. This wasn't some random chat or bet, they had planned this with Jonelle's blessing. The 3 most popular girls in school were plotting to get a nerd to prom, and I missed every single hint. Story 32. Not a lady here, but once I had a girl visit me from halfway across the country and sleep in the same bed with me, 4 times. I genuinely thought we were just friends. 10 years later, I was sitting on the toilet, and it suddenly hit me. She definitely didn't fly across the country just to sleep in my bed, for crying out loud. I honestly feel bad for her now because, in reality, I was really into her too. Story 33. One day, right before my husband was due home from work, I got all set up, stripped down, put on one of his button-up shirts, and arranged myself in bed in a come-hither kind of way. When he walked in, I was expecting a quick reaction. Naked wife in his shirt, obvious, right? Wrong. He just lay down next to me, talked about his day, and seemed ready for a nap. I figured maybe he was just really tired, so I got up, put on some clothes, and went down the hall to fold laundry, deciding to try again later. Not 2 minutes later, I hear him come running down the hall, stopping in front of me with a sheepish grin. Turns out he hadn't realized I was initiating anything. He pulled out his smoothest moves, and we ended up back in the bedroom, after all. Story 34. I asked this guy for his number after a meetup and set up a date. Though he didn't realize it was a date until a friend we bumped into texted him later, apologizing for crashing it. 3 years later, I'm sitting next to him on the couch, browsing dogs available for adoption. He eventually caught on. Story 35. My ex was pretty reserved and had limited experience with girls when I first met him, so it took him forever to realize I was interested. I'd get him to sleep over at my place or let me stay at his to snuggle, wearing just a t-shirt and nothing else. I'd press my body up against him, talk with our faces an inch apart, whisper in his ear, and rest my hand on his thigh, just inches from the obvious. It took over a month of this before he finally realized I wasn't just being friendly. Edit. We later joked about it, and he admitted he was just super nervous and wondered why I didn't just make the move. I started laughing because I was nervous too. We were both so nervous, we played ourselves. Story 36. I was texting him every day and he thought I was just being friendly. I called him cute names and he thought I was joking. I'd ask him to judge my outfits, and he didn't think anything of it. I made bets with him where the loser had to do something, and it always revolved around sex, but he thought I was just playing around. It wasn't until I was tipsy that I finally had to tell him I'd like to have sex with him for him to realize I liked him. In the end, I'm glad I had a drink that day, or we wouldn't have been together for 7 years. Edit. Just to clarify, this isn't how I normally act with my male friends. I like to maintain clear boundaries, so I thought I was giving some pretty obvious hints. When I was tipsy, he didn't act on what I was saying, but he did take the hint, and that led to us talking about our mutual feelings the next day. Edit 2. One more clarification. I'm not the type to text or call a lot, and he knew that. I don't usually give cute nicknames to my friends, either. The outfits I asked him to judge weren't my usual ones. They were miniskirts and tops that showed a lot of cleavage, insert embarrassed face here. I guess what might seem normal for some girls is an exception for others, depending on personality. But I have to thank you all for helping me understand why he didn't pick up on my hints back then, even though I expected him to know something about me after 3 months. Story 37. I went to this outdoor chess spot and noticed this guy there. Definitely a chess nerd, not overly concerned with his appearance, but he said some things in conversation that I really liked. Plus, being good at chess? Seriously hot. I went full-on manic pixie dream girl mode, making eye contact, laughing at his jokes, acting super interested in everything he said, and putting in the effort to be charming. I told him to come over to my chess table and waited for him to approach, but he was totally engrossed in watching someone else's game. Finally, I asked if he wanted to hang out later that night. He looked at me, deadpan, and said, "No, I want to keep playing chess." He genuinely preferred playing chess over hanging out with a girl who was obviously interested. I even tried to puff out my cleavage. I wasn't used to being totally shut down like that, and I left the chess spot feeling frustrated and confused. Even now, a year later, I still think about that guy sometimes. Story 38. When my fiancé and I were in high school, we were best friends, which, of course, meant I was too shy to admit how I really felt about him. So, my subtle move was always to sit in front of him during lectures, making sure my inner was showing. This went on for every class we had together, and we had a lot. After 3 years of playing this game, I finally confessed my feelings before he left for college. Turns out, he was just as shy as I was. He said those 4 years were the biggest tease ever, and it's honestly hilarious to talk about now. Story 39. I went over to this girl's house, and we were just hanging out in her basement. She pulled out her laptop and said, "Let's check out my Tumblr." I was like, sure, why not? So she set the laptop on the ground, and I laid down in front of it. She laid down on top of me while scrolling through her Tumblr. The whole time, it was filled with sex gifs and images, and she kept saying things like, "I want to do this," and "I want to try that." After about 30 minutes of this, she drove me home. As she dropped me off, she casually said, "I thought you were gay." Story 40. Last summer, I was doing my best to win over the guy who's now my boyfriend. We were heading to a friend's pool, and while everyone else was inside changing, he and I made our way out to the pool alone. I seized the moment, slipping off my clothes as sensually as possible, revealing my swimsuit underneath. He took one look, then sprinted right past me and cannonballed straight into the pool. Story 41. On Halloween morning in 2014, he knocked on my door to drive me to work. We'd been friends for about a month, and he hadn't made a move, so I decided to answer the door wearing just a t-shirt and cat ears. Nothing else. That bastard walked right past me and went straight to the kitchen to look for coffee. Fast forward, and we've been married for 10 months now. He insists he knew exactly what I was doing, but that being a gentleman would get him further. I call total nonsense on that. Story 42. I was laying down on a bench with my head in his lap talking about our previous experiences. This was high school, and he told me he had never had a BJ before. I told him, with my head near his jewels, that I could blow his mind. Nothing. Crickets. Edit. We were in a public park, and my curfew was fast approaching. I didn't expect him to pull anything out, but I wanted him to know what I had in mind. Eventually, I went for it, but not before trying to be coy one last time, and then being completely straightforward the third time. Story 43. Not exactly an answer to the question but related. I was dating a guy who told me up front that he was terrible at picking up signs that someone liked him, was flirting, etc. So, on our third date we planned that he would stay the night at my place. I thought that was pretty obvious, but just to make sure, I put a bunch of condoms on a platter on the bed, with notes all around it, pointing to the platter that said, "This is a sign." He thought it was hilarious. Then we did it. It was awesome. Story 44. This happened years ago when I was in college. A friend of one of my roommates was staying over at our apartment. We were talking on the deck, and she began flirting with me, even mentioning her favorite positions. I thought we were on the same page, so I put my hand on her thigh to continue the conversation in that direction. However, nothing came of it, and I ended up going to sleep. The next morning, my roommate told me that the girl had slept in his room with the door locked, because she felt uncomfortable and believed I had made her feel unsafe solely because I put my hand on her thigh as she described, unsolicited by the way, her fave positions to me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.